Dr. Ryan Mitchell glanced at the clock on the wall. It was almost midnight and the hospital corridors were quieter than usual. He'd been pulling night shifts for the past 3 years at Metropolitan General, and honestly, he didn't mind them. There was something peaceful about the hospital at night. When the chaos of the day settled down and you could actually think. Ryan was 29 years old, one of the youngest doctors on staff, and he'd earned his position through pure hard work. No family connections, no fancy recommendations, just long hours, sleepless nights during medical school, and a genuine desire to help people. Some of his colleagues thought he was too serious, too dedicated, but Ryan believed that if you were going to do something, you should do it right. Tonight, Nurse Patterson had called in sick, which meant someone had to cover her rounds in the VIP wing. Most of the senior staff avoided extra work when they could, but Ryan volunteered without hesitation. The VIP wing was on the 8th floor, a place where wealthy patients paid premium prices for private rooms and extra attention. Ryan didn't go there often. His usual rounds were in the general ward, where he treated everyone from construction workers to retired teachers. As he walked through the plush hallways of the 8th floor, his sneakers squeaking slightly on the polished marble, Ryan checked the assignment sheet. Room 807, patient name Victoria Ashford. He stopped for a moment. Even someone like Ryan, who barely watched the news, knew that name. Victoria Ashford was the CEO of Ashford Industries, one of the biggest tech companies in the country. Her face had been all over the newspapers 8 months ago when her car crashed on a rainy highway. She'd been in a coma ever since. Ryan had never treated her before. Different teams handled the VIP patients, usually the senior doctors who knew how to deal with powerful families and media attention. But tonight she was his responsibility, at least for this one simple task. He needed to change the bandage on her shoulder, a routine procedure that took maybe 15 minutes. He pushed open the door to room 807 and stepped inside. The room was huge, more like a hotel suite than a hospital room. Soft lighting, expensive furniture, and windows that overlooked the city skyline. But Ryan's attention went straight to the bed, where Victoria Ashford lay motionless. She looked smaller than he expected. In all those news photos, she'd seemed larger than life, commanding and powerful. Now lying there with tubes and monitors connected to her body, she just looked like any other patient. Her dark hair was spread across the pillow and her face was peaceful, almost as if she were just sleeping normally. But Ryan knew better. The monitors showed brain activity, but she was trapped somewhere inside herself, unreachable. He washed his hands thoroughly and put on fresh gloves. Then he pulled up a chair beside her bed and began carefully removing the old bandage from her shoulder. This was a wound that had been there since the accident, something that hadn't quite healed properly. The medical notes said it was being monitored, but nothing seemed concerning. Except something did concern Ryan. As he peeled back the layers of gauze, he noticed a slight discoloration around the wound edges. The skin looked more inflamed than it should. He leaned closer, studying it carefully. There was a faint smell too, barely noticeable, but it was there. His instincts kicked in, the same instincts that had saved patients before. This wasn't just a slow-healing wound. This was the beginning of an infection. Ryan frowned. How had the previous medical team missed this? He checked the chart again. All the notes said the wound was stable, healing normally. But what he was looking at told a different story. If this infection wasn't treated properly, it could spread. For someone in Victoria's condition, already fighting to recover from brain trauma, an infection could be devastating. It could even be the thing preventing her from waking up. He made a decision right then. He wasn't just going to change the bandage and move on. He was going to treat this properly. For the next hour and a half, Ryan worked with complete focus. He cleaned the wound thoroughly, using techniques he'd learned from an old mentor who believed in being meticulous. He applied an antibiotic ointment that wasn't in the standard protocol, but that he knew would help. He changed his gloves 3 times to avoid any contamination. And through it all, he talked to her. This was something Ryan did with all his coma patients, even though some of his colleagues laughed at him for it. He believed that somewhere deep down they could hear, maybe not consciously, but on some level. And even if they couldn't, it made him feel more human to treat them like people instead of just bodies to maintain. "Okay, Ms. Ashford," he said softly as he worked. "I know you've been through a lot. 8 months is a long time to be away from the world. But I want you to know that we're taking care of you. I see this infection starting here, and I'm going to make sure it doesn't get worse. You're strong. Your body is strong. And maybe, just maybe, fixing this will help you feel better. He continued talking as he applied the fresh bandage, telling her about his day, about a funny incident with a patient that morning, about how the weather was getting colder outside. His voice was calm and steady, the same tone he used with all his patients. Respectful. Kind. Treating her like a person who deserved dignity, not just a famous name on a chart. When he finally finished, Ryan sat back and looked at his work. The bandage was perfect, and he'd documented everything in detail, including his observations about the infection and the additional treatment he'd provided. He knew some of the senior doctors might question his decisions, but he was confident he'd done the right thing. "There you go," he said, standing up and removing his gloves. "All done. You're going to feel better soon, Ms. Ashford. I promise we're taking care of you." He checked her monitors one last time. Heart rate, blood pressure, oxygen levels, all stable. Everything looked normal. Ryan made a few notes in the chart, then quietly left the room. What Ryan didn't see, because he was focused on writing his notes, was the slightest flutter of Victoria's eyelids. Just a tiny movement, barely visible, the kind of thing you'd miss if you blinked. The monitors didn't register anything unusual. The night continued peacefully, but 3 hours later, when Nurse Davis came in for the routine 4 a.m. check, she nearly dropped her clipboard. Victoria's eyes were moving under her eyelids. Not much, but definitely moving. Her fingers twitched, and when Davis leaned closer, she could swear she heard a sound like someone trying to speak. Davis hit the call button immediately. Within minutes, the room filled with medical staff. Doctors rushed in, checking everything, running tests. The neurologist on call couldn't believe what he was seeing. After 8 months of no change, Victoria Ashford was showing signs of waking up. By 7 in the morning, when Ryan was finishing his shift and getting ready to go home, the entire hospital was buzzing with news. The impossible had happened. Victoria Ashford was regaining consciousness, and the first word she managed to whisper in a voice so quiet the doctors had to lean close to hear it was a name. Ryan. Nobody understood why. Nobody knew who she was asking for at first. But when they checked the overnight logs and saw that Dr. Ryan Mitchell had been in her room, changing her bandage just hours before, the pieces started falling into place. Ryan himself had no idea yet. He was in the locker room, changing out of his scrubs, exhausted and ready for sleep. He didn't know that his life was about to change completely. He didn't know that one simple bandage change, done with care and attention that others had overlooked, had set in motion something extraordinary. All he knew was that he'd done his job the way he always did, thoroughly, carefully, with genuine concern for his patient. Sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. Ryan was halfway home when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer it because he was so tired, but the caller ID showed it was the hospital. He pulled over to the side of the road and picked up. "Dr. Mitchell, you need to come back immediately." It was Dr. Henderson, the hospital's medical director. His voice was urgent but excited. "It's about Victoria Ashford. She's awake." Ryan sat there for a moment, stunned. "What? That's impossible. I just saw her a few hours ago. She was completely unresponsive." "I know, but she's conscious now. And Ryan, she's asking for you, by name." The drive back to the hospital felt surreal. Ryan's mind was racing. How could she possibly know his name? He'd introduced himself while changing her bandage, sure, but she was in a coma. Patients in comas don't just wake up and remember conversations that happened hours ago. It didn't make medical sense. When he arrived, the 8th floor was chaos. News vans were already gathering outside the hospital. The Ashford family had been notified, and apparently several of them were on their way. Hospital security had to set up barriers to keep reporters from sneaking in. This wasn't just a patient waking from a coma. This was a billionaire CEO returning from the edge of death, and everyone wanted the story. Dr. Henderson met Ryan outside room 807. He was a tall man in his 60s, usually calm and composed, but right now he looked rattled. "Before you go in, you need to understand something," Henderson said. "This is already becoming a media circus. The Ashford family is powerful, and they're going to have questions. Lots of questions. About her treatment, about what happened last night, about everything. Just stick to the facts and be professional." Ryan nodded, though his heart was pounding. He stepped into the room. Victoria was sitting up slightly in bed, supported by pillows. Her eyes were open, focused, and alert. A neurologist and 2 nurses were checking her vitals, asking her questions, shining lights in her eyes. When Ryan entered, Victoria's gaze shifted to him immediately. "You," she said, her voice weak but clear. "You're Ryan." He approached the bed slowly. "Yes, Ms. Ashford, I'm Dr. Ryan Mitchell. How are you feeling?" A small smile crossed her face, though she looked exhausted. "Like I've been asleep for 8 months. Because I have been. But I heard you, Dr. Mitchell. Last night. I heard every word you said." The neurologist, Dr. Patel, exchanged glances with the nurses. "Ms. Ashford, we need to run more tests to understand your cognitive function. Memory formation during a coma is extremely rare and usually unreliable." But Victoria shook her head slightly. "It's not unreliable. I remember everything. Not just from last night, but from all these months. Every conversation the nurses had. Every time doctors discussed my case like I wasn't there. Every visit from my family." Her eyes found Ryan again. But he was different. He talked to me like I was a person. And he noticed something no one else did. Ryan stepped closer. "The infection." "You mean the infection in your shoulder wound? Is that what it was?" Victoria's voice got stronger. "I couldn't see it, obviously, but I could feel it. For weeks, maybe months, something was wrong. It hurt. But I couldn't tell anyone because I couldn't move or speak. And then you came and you noticed. You fixed it. And somehow after that I could start fighting my way back." The neurologist looked skeptical. "Ms. Ashford, awareness during coma states is controversial in the medical community. What you're describing is extremely unusual." "I don't care if it's unusual," Victoria said firmly. "I know what I experienced. I was trapped, completely aware but unable to move a muscle. Do you have any idea what that's like? Hearing people talk about you, make decisions about you while you're screaming inside your own head and no one can hear you?" The room went silent. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. If what she was saying was true, she'd been conscious but paralyzed for 8 months. The psychological trauma alone would be unimaginable. "I heard the nurses complain about their shifts," Victoria continued, her voice taking on an edge. "I heard doctors discuss me like I was already gone, just a body being kept alive by machines. I heard my own brother say maybe it would be better if they just let me go." She paused, and Ryan could see tears forming in her eyes. "But you, Dr. Mitchell, you treated me like I mattered, like I was still in there somewhere, and you cared enough to look closer when something wasn't right." Ryan didn't know what to say. He'd just been doing his job the way he always did. But clearly to Victoria, it had meant everything. Over the next few days, the hospital became a circus. Specialists flew in from across the country to examine Victoria. Her case was extraordinary. While coma patients occasionally retained some awareness, the level of consciousness and memory she described was almost unprecedented. She could recount specific conversations, remember the exact days when certain events happened, even recall the smell of specific perfumes nurses wore. The media went crazy with the story. Headlines screamed about the miracle recovery. Religious groups called it divine intervention. Scientists wanted to study her brain. And through it all, Victoria insisted that Dr. Ryan Mitchell had saved her life. But not everyone was celebrating. Ryan first met Victoria's brother, James Ashford, on the 3rd day after her awakening. James was 45, polished and cold, wearing a suit that probably cost more than Ryan's car. He cornered Ryan in the hallway outside Victoria's room. "Dr. Mitchell, we need to talk." They moved to a private consultation room. James closed the door and turned to face Ryan with barely concealed hostility. "I want to know exactly what your relationship is with my sister." Ryan was confused. "I'm her doctor. I changed her bandage 3 nights ago." "That's it? That's it?" James laughed, but there was no humor in it. "My sister wakes up after 8 months and the first thing she does is ask for you. She refuses to talk to reporters without you present. She's demanding that you oversee her continued care. So forgive me if I think there's more to this story. Mr. Ashford, I assure you I had never even been in your sister's room before that night. I was covering for another nurse. It was completely random." "Nothing is random when it comes to my family's fortune," James said coldly. "Victoria is worth billions. Ashford Industries is worth even more. There are people who would do anything to get close to that kind of money and power." Ryan felt his face flush with anger. "I'm not one of those people. I'm a doctor. I took an oath to help patients, and that's what I did." James studied him for a long moment. "Maybe. Or maybe you saw an opportunity and you're smarter than you look. Either way, I'm watching you, Dr. Mitchell, very closely. The conversation left Ryan shaken. He'd never thought about the money or the power. He'd just seen a patient who needed help. But now he was realizing that by saving Victoria, he'd stepped into a world he didn't understand, full of suspicion and ulterior motives. Things got worse when the hospital administration called him in for a meeting. They praised his work publicly, but privately they had concerns. Were all his decisions regarding Victoria medically sound? Had he followed proper protocols? Why had he deviated from the standard bandage change procedure? They didn't accuse him of anything directly, but the implication was clear. They were protecting themselves, making sure they wouldn't be liable if anything went wrong. Ryan felt like the walls were closing in. What should have been a moment of triumph saving a patient's life was turning into a nightmare of scrutiny and suspicion. But Victoria herself was a force of nature. As she regained her strength, she became more demanding. She wanted detailed explanations of her medical treatment over the past 8 months. She wanted to know who had made decisions about her care and why, and she made it abundantly clear that she trusted Ryan more than any other doctor in the facility. 1 week after waking up, Victoria summoned Ryan to her room. The tubes were gone now, and she could sit up fully, though she still had physical therapy ahead of her. She looked directly at him with those sharp, intelligent eyes. "They're all trying to figure out what you want from me," she said bluntly. "My family, the hospital administrators, probably half the staff. They think you must have an angle." Ryan sat down, exhausted by the whole situation. I genuinely don't. I just did my job." "I know," Victoria said. "That's why I trust you. You're the only person in months who hasn't wanted something from me. Do you know how rare that is in my world? Everyone wants something. Money, connections, favors, access. But you just wanted me to get better." "That's what doctors are supposed to want," Ryan said quietly. Victoria smiled. "You'd be surprised how few actually do." She paused, then continued. "I'm going to make you an offer, Dr. Mitchell. I need someone I can trust for my continued recovery. Someone who will be honest with me, who will put my health first instead of politics or money. I want you to be my personal physician during rehabilitation. I'll pay you 10 times whatever the hospital pays. And when I'm fully recovered, I'll make sure you're set up however you want. Private practice, research funding, whatever you dream of." Ryan stared at her. It was an incredible offer. Life-changing money. It would wipe out his student loans instantly, give him financial security he'd never imagined. But something felt wrong about it. "Ms. Ashford, I appreciate the offer. I really do. But I'm not sure mixing that kind of money with medical care is appropriate." "Why not?" Victoria's expression was challenging. "Doctors get paid. You're not a volunteer. What's the difference between the hospital paying you and me paying you directly?" Ryan struggled to articulate what he was feeling. "The difference is that kind of money changes the relationship. It creates pressure and expectations that might compromise care." Victoria was quiet for a moment, then nodded slowly. "You're right, and that's exactly why I need you, because you think like that." She adjusted her position in bed. "Let me be honest with you about something. During those 8 months, I heard things. Things about my company, about my family, about decisions being made while I was trapped. I need to get back control of my life, and I need someone with no agenda helping me. Please consider it." Ryan looked at this woman who'd been through such an ordeal. Despite all the money and power, right now she just seemed vulnerable and alone. "I'll think about it," he finally said. What he didn't know was that agreeing to even think about it would pull him into a web of corporate intrigue, family betrayal, and danger that would test everything he believed in. Ryan spent 3 sleepless nights thinking about Victoria's offer. On one hand, it was everything he'd never allowed himself to dream about. Financial freedom, the ability to practice medicine the way he believed it should be practiced, without bureaucracy and budget constraints. On the other hand, every instinct told him he was stepping into something complicated and potentially dangerous. In the end, it wasn't the money that convinced him. It was the look in Victoria's eyes when she talked about being trapped, aware but helpless. She'd been through something horrific and she trusted him. As a doctor, how could he turn his back on a patient who genuinely needed his help? He negotiated the terms carefully. He would take a leave of absence from the hospital, work as Victoria's physician during her recovery period, but at a reasonable salary, not the fortune she'd initially offered. He also insisted on maintaining complete medical independence. No family pressure, no corporate interference. If he felt her recovery was being compromised, he could speak freely. Victoria agreed to everything immediately, which should have been his first warning sign. People that rich and powerful don't usually agree so quickly unless they're desperate. The Ashford estate was located 40 minutes outside the city, behind gates and security that made the hospital look casual. Ryan moved into a guest house on the property, a small building that was larger than his entire apartment. A medical suite had been set up in the main house with equipment that most hospitals would envy. The first 2 weeks were straightforward medical work. Ryan coordinated with physical therapists to help Victoria rebuild her strength. 8 months in bed had weakened her muscles significantly. He monitored her medications, tracked her cognitive recovery, and ran regular tests. Victoria proved to be a determined patient, pushing herself hard, sometimes too hard. Ryan had to remind her that recovery took time, but he also started to see the complicated world she lived in. The estate staff were polite but distant, clearly unsure about this outsider who'd suddenly gained Victoria's trust. Her brother James visited twice that first week, and both times the temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. He barely acknowledged Ryan's presence, treating him like hired help. Victoria's board members came for meetings discussing company business that went completely over Ryan's head. He tried to stay out of those conversations, focusing on his medical duties, but he couldn't help noticing the tension. People spoke carefully around Victoria, watching their words, and she watched them back with sharp, calculating eyes. It was during the 3rd week that things began to unravel. Ryan was reviewing Victoria's progress notes one evening when she asked him to join her in the study. It was a massive room lined with books, with a fireplace and leather chairs that probably cost more than most cars. Victoria sat behind an antique desk, looking more like the CEO she used to be than a recovering patient. "I need to show you something," she said, pushing a folder across the desk toward him. "And I need you to tell me if I'm crazy." Ryan opened the folder. Inside were financial documents, spreadsheets with numbers he could barely understand, emails between executives, and official company reports. He flipped through several pages, confused. "I don't understand. What am I looking at?" "Before my accident," Victoria said, her voice low and controlled, "I was investigating some financial irregularities in my company. Money disappearing, contracts being awarded to suspicious vendors, patterns that didn't make sense. I'd narrowed it down to a few key executives who had access to make these kinds of transactions." Ryan put the folder down. "Ms. Ashford, I'm a doctor, not an accountant. I don't know anything about corporate finance, I know. But you know about patterns. You're a diagnostician. You look at symptoms and find the cause. That's exactly what I need." She leaned forward. 3 days before my accident, I confronted my brother James about some of these discrepancies. We had a terrible argument. He told me I was paranoid, seeing conspiracies where there were none. The next day, I had my car serviced at the company garage. 2 days after that, my brakes failed on the highway. Ryan felt a chill run down his spine. "You think your accident wasn't an accident?" "I know it wasn't," Victoria said firmly. "The police report said it was brake failure due to poor maintenance. But Ryan, my car was less than a year old and I'd just had it serviced. The odds of complete brake failure like that are astronomical. Did you tell the police about your suspicions?" "Of course I did. They investigated and found nothing. The mechanic said he'd done standard maintenance. My family said I was under stress from work. Everyone dismissed it as a tragic accident. And then I was in a coma for 8 months and the whole thing was forgotten." Ryan stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the manicured gardens. This was way beyond anything he'd signed up for. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because while I was in that coma, my brother took over operational control of the company. And in the past 8 months, he's made decisions that I strongly disagree with. He's pushing for a merger with a Chinese tech firm that would essentially dissolve everything my father built. The board is going along with it because they think I'm incapacitated, not fit to return." "But you are returning," Ryan pointed out. "You're recovering. You can stop the merger." Victoria shook her head. "It's not that simple. James has been very careful. He's been spreading doubts about my mental fitness, suggesting that the coma affected my judgment, that I'm paranoid and unstable. Some board members are already questioning whether I should resume control." Ryan turned back to face her. "What do you want from me?" "I want you to help me prove I'm mentally competent. More than that, I need someone I can trust while I figure out what James has really been doing. Everyone else around me has an agenda, loyalties to different factions of the company. You're the only person who has no stake in any of this." Except I have a stake in your health, Ryan said. And what you're talking about sounds stressful and potentially dangerous. My job is to help you recover, not drag you into corporate warfare. They're the same thing, Victoria insisted. I can't fully recover while my life's work is being stolen from me. The stress of watching my company be destroyed would do more damage than any investigation. Ryan wanted to refuse. Every rational part of his brain told him to walk away, go back to the hospital, return to his normal life. But he looked at Victoria, sitting there with determination burning in her eyes despite everything she'd been through, and he couldn't do it. I'll help you, he finally said. But if at any point I think this is damaging your health, we stop. Agreed? Agreed. That night, Ryan lay awake in the guest house wondering what he'd gotten himself into. He'd become a doctor to help people heal, not to get involved in corporate conspiracies and potential attempted murder, but he'd given his word. The next morning, everything got worse. Ryan went to his car to drive into town for some supplies and found his tires slashed. All 4 of them cut cleanly with something sharp. The estate's head of security, a former police officer named Phillips, examined the damage and said it was probably kids from the nearby town, but his eyes told a different story. This was a message. 2 days later, Ryan received an anonymous email at his personal address, which was concerning because very few people had it. The email contained a single line: doctors should focus on medicine, not things that don't concern them. He showed it to Victoria, who wasn't surprised at all. They're trying to scare you off, she said calmly. James probably. He knows I trust you, and that makes you a problem for him. Maybe I should be scared off, Ryan said, more unsettled than he wanted to admit. I'm not trained for this kind of thing. But Victoria looked at him with an expression that was part desperation, part steel. Please don't leave. You're the only ally I have right now. The only person I know isn't on James's payroll or too terrified to stand up to him. Ryan stayed, though he started looking over his shoulder more often. He also started paying closer attention to the documents Victoria showed him. She was right that patterns existed. Money flowing through shell companies, contracts awarded without proper bidding processes, executives who'd suddenly become very wealthy. He didn't understand all the details, but he understood enough to know something wasn't right. The breaking point came 3 weeks into his stay at the estate. Victoria had been scheduled to attend her first board meeting since waking from the coma. Ryan insisted on going with her, concerned about how the stress might affect her. The meeting was held in a glass conference room in the Ashford Industries headquarters, a sleek building downtown. James was already there when they arrived, along with 12 board members. The atmosphere was cold and formal. Victoria took her seat at the head of the table, and Ryan stood against the wall trying to be invisible. The meeting started professionally enough. Updates on quarterly earnings, discussion of ongoing projects, but then James brought up the merger proposal. He presented it as a done deal, something the board had already approved in principle during Victoria's absence. Victoria listened quietly, her face unreadable. Then she spoke. I don't approve this merger. It undervalues our company, gives away our intellectual property, and would result in massive job losses. We're not proceeding with it. James smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. Victoria, with all respect, you've been out of commission for 8 months. The business landscape has changed. This merger is in the best interest of shareholders. I disagree completely. Perhaps, James said smoothly. Your judgment is still affected by your medical condition. The trauma you experienced was significant. No one would blame you for needing mowing or time to recover before making major business decisions. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. Victoria's hands tightened on the table, but her voice remained calm. My cognitive function has been thoroughly tested. Dr. Mitchell can confirm I'm completely capable of making business decisions. All eyes turned to Ryan. He suddenly understood this had been a setup. They wanted him to either support Victoria and make himself a target, or admit she might not be fully recovered, which would give James the ammunition he needed. Ryan stepped forward. Ms. Ashford has made remarkable progress. All neurological tests show full cognitive function. There's no medical reason she can't resume her duties. But is she mentally stable? James pressed. She's been making some unusual claims. Paranoid statements about her accident. Conspiracy theories about the company. Doesn't that concern you as her physician? Ryan felt the trap closing around them. If he defended Victoria's theories, He'd look unprofessional and biased. If he suggested she was paranoid, he'd betray her trust and give James exactly what he wanted. Before Ryan could answer, Victoria stood up. "This meeting is adjourned. James will speak privately. The rest of you expect a memo from me by end of day regarding the merger. It's not happening." She walked out and Ryan followed, his heart pounding. In the elevator down, Victoria was silent, her jaw clenched. Only when they were in the car did she speak. "He's going to challenge my competency. He'll try to have me declared unfit to run the company. That's his play. Can he do that?" Ryan asked. "With the right doctors and enough pressure on the board?" "Yes." She looked at Ryan. "I'm going to need your help. More help than you signed up for. I need to prove I'm right about what James has been doing. Because if I can show the board he's been embezzling and maybe even tried to kill me, then his credibility is destroyed." Ryan looked at this woman who'd survived 8 months in a coma and woke up to find her life being stolen from under her. He thought about the slashed tires, the threatening email, the way James had tried to manipulate him in that meeting. He'd spent his whole career avoiding conflict, keeping his head down, just doing his job. But sometimes he realized doing the right thing meant stepping into the fight. "Tell me what you need," he said. Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan's life became something he barely recognized. By day, he continued his duties as Victoria's physician, monitoring her recovery, conducting therapy sessions, maintaining the appearance of a normal doctor-patient relationship. By night, he helped her dig through financial records, connecting dots between shell companies and suspicious transactions. Ryan discovered he had a talent for seeing patterns, probably from years of diagnostic medicine. Where Victoria saw numbers and contracts, Ryan saw symptoms of a disease eating away at the company, money flowing out through carefully disguised channels, projects approved that made no business sense, executives suddenly wealthy beyond their legitimate salaries. But finding evidence was one thing, proving it was something else entirely. The pressure from James intensified. He began making appearances at the estate, always with a lawyer in tow, always asking pointed questions about Victoria's mental state. He hired a private physician to independently evaluate his sister's fitness to work. The doctor, clearly on James's payroll, recommended extended psychiatric observation. Victoria fought back, but Ryan could see the strain it was putting on her. She was sleeping less, eating less, pushing herself too hard. As her doctor, he knew he should tell her to rest, to step back. But as the only person she trusted, he understood why she couldn't. Then came the night everything changed. Ryan's apartment in the city, the one he'd kept even after moving to the estate, was broken into. He discovered it when he went back to grab some of his belongings. The door wasn't damaged, which meant someone had picked the lock or had a key. Nothing was stolen. Not his laptop, not his modest savings, not any valuables. But everything had been searched. Drawers opened, papers rifled through, closets emptied. It was a message, and Ryan got it loud and clear. Someone was watching him. Someone wanted him to know they could reach him anywhere. He told Victoria that evening, expecting her to be concerned. Instead, she got a look in her eyes that worried him even more than the break-in. "They're getting nervous," she said. "That means we're getting close." Close to what? Getting killed? Ryan's frustration boiled over. "Victoria, this has gone too far. We need to go to the police with what we have. We don't have enough. Not yet. Everything is circumstantial. James has covered his tracks too well." She paced her study, energy practically crackling off her. "But there's one place we might find proof. Real concrete evidence." "Where?" "James's personal office at the estate. He keeps a private safe there. Our father installed it years ago for sensitive family documents. If James has been doing what I think he's been doing, he'd keep the real records there, the ones that show where the money actually went." Ryan stared at her. "You want to break into your brother's office and crack his safe? I want you to do it, actually. At the annual Ashford Family Gala, which is in 3 days. Everyone who's anyone in the city will be there, including James. He'll be busy playing host and you'll have access to the house." "Absolutely not," Ryan said flatly. "I'm a doctor, not a criminal. And even if I were willing to do something that illegal, I don't know the first thing about breaking into safes." Victoria sat down, her energy suddenly deflating. For the first time since waking from her coma, she looked truly defeated. "You're right. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have asked. It's just that I'm running out of options. The board meets next week to vote on James's motion, to have me removed for mental incompetence. If I can't prove he's the one who's actually corrupt, I lose everything. Ryan felt a war going on inside himself. Every bit of professional training told him to walk away. This wasn't his fight. He was a doctor, not a detective or a spy. But he looked at Victoria, this brilliant woman who'd survived something impossible only to find herself fighting for her life's work. And he couldn't abandon her. "I need to think about it," he said finally. Over the next 2 days, Ryan wrestled with the decision. He tried to find another way, any other way, but kept coming back to the same conclusion. They needed proof, and the proof was in that safe. The night before the gala, James showed up at the estate unannounced. Ryan was in the medical suite updating Victoria's charts when he heard raised voices from the main house. He found James and Victoria in a heated argument in the foyer. "You've turned into a paranoid mess," James was saying, his polished demeanor cracking, making wild accusations, digging into company finances like some conspiracy theorist. "The board is right to question your fitness. The only mess here is the one you've made of our father's company," Victoria shot back. "And I'm going to prove it." James's eyes narrowed. Then he seemed to notice Ryan standing in the doorway. He walked over, getting uncomfortably close. "This is your doing, isn't it, Doctor? Feeding her these delusions, encouraging her paranoia. I wonder why. Maybe you see an opportunity here. A vulnerable woman with a fortune, grateful to the man who saved her." "Is that your angle?" Ryan forced himself to stay calm. "My only concern is Ms. Ashford's health." "Then act like it." James moved even closer, his voice dropping to a whisper only Ryan could hear. "Walk away, Dr. Mitchell. Take the money I offered you last week. Go back to your hospital, treat patients who actually need you, because if you keep going down this path with my sister, I can't guarantee your safety. Accidents happen. You of all people should know that." The threat was crystal clear. Ryan met James's eyes and saw something cold and calculating there, something that made him believe every suspicion Victoria had about her brother. James left without another word. Victoria came over to Ryan, concern on her face. "What did he say to you?" "He offered me money to leave. And when I didn't respond, he threatened me." Victoria nodded slowly. "Then we have our answer. He wouldn't be threatening you if he wasn't guilty. We do this, tomorrow night at the gala. I need to know what you're willing to risk." Ryan took a deep breath. He thought about his career, his reputation, everything he'd worked for. Then he thought about doing the right thing, even when it was hard, even when it was dangerous. "Tell me the plan," he said. The Ashford annual gala was legendary in the city's social circles. 500 guests, all wealthy, all influential. The estate was transformed into something out of a fairy tale, with thousands of lights, live orchestras, and catering from the city's best restaurants. Ryan, uncomfortable in a rented tuxedo, felt completely out of place. Victoria, however, was in her element. She'd emerged from her recovery looking stunning, wearing a dark blue dress that managed to be both elegant and powerful. She worked the room like the CEO she was, greeting guests, making small talk, being seen, proving to everyone that she was back, competent and in control. James played the gracious host, but Ryan could see the tension in his jaw every time he looked at his sister. The two circled each other all evening like predators, smiling for the cameras while waging a silent war. Ryan's job was to be Victoria's companion for the evening, the loyal physician watching over his recovering patient. But both of them knew his real purpose. Around 10 p.m., when the party was in full swing and James was occupied with a group of investors, Victoria gave Ryan a subtle nod. His heart hammering, Ryan slipped away from the main ballroom. He'd memorized the layout of the house over his weeks there. James's private office was in the east wing, away from the party. The hallways were empty, all the staff busy with the gala. Ryan reached the office door. It was locked, but Victoria had given him a key she'd kept from years ago, hoping her brother hadn't changed the locks. The key turned smoothly, and Ryan slipped inside. The office was dark, illuminated only by moonlight through large windows. Ryan closed the door and turned on a small flashlight. The safe was behind a painting, just as Victoria had described. It was an older model, with a combination lock rather than digital. Victoria had given Ryan the combination, her father's birthday and mother's anniversary. Ryan's hand shook as he dialed the numbers. The safe didn't open. He tried again, more carefully. Nothing. Panic started to set in. James must have changed the combination. Ryan stood there, mind racing. Then he remembered something Victoria had said about her father. The man had been predictable, always used dates that meant something. If not birthdays and anniversaries, then what? Ryan tried the date Ashford Industries was founded. The safe clicked open. Inside were folders, USB drives, and a leather-bound notebook. Ryan quickly pulled out his phone and started photographing everything. Page after page of handwritten notes in James's writing, detailing transactions, account numbers, names of shell companies. There were emails printed out, showing coordination with executives. And most damning, there was a receipt from the company garage, dated the day before Victoria's accident, showing unauthorized work done on her vehicle by a mechanic, who'd been paid a substantial bonus the following week. Ryan was so focused on photographing evidence that he didn't hear the footsteps in the hallway until it was too late. The door opened. Ryan spun around, flashlight beam catching the face of Phillips, the head of security. But Phillips wasn't alone. Standing behind him was someone Ryan had never seen before, a large man in a dark suit who radiated menace. "Dr. Mitchell," Phillips said, his expression regretful. "You shouldn't be here," Ryan's mind raced. His phone was still in his hand, containing all the photos. If they took it, everything was lost. He did the only thing he could think of. He hit send on an email to Victoria with all the photos attached, then quickly turned off the phone. "I was just looking for a quiet place," Ryan tried, knowing how pathetic it sounded. The large man stepped forward. "In a locked office? With the safe open? Don't insult us, doctor." What happened next was a blur. The man grabbed Ryan and there was a struggle. Ryan wasn't a fighter, had never been in a real fight in his life. But desperation gave him strength. He broke free for a moment, stumbled toward the door. The man caught him and Ryan felt a sharp pain as his head connected with something hard. The room spun. He heard shouting, Phillips saying something about going too far. Then darkness started creeping in around the edges of his vision. The last thing Ryan remembered was the door bursting open and Victoria's voice, sharp and commanding, ordering them to stop. Then everything went black. Ryan woke up in the medical suite with a pounding headache and Victoria's worried face hovering over him. She was holding an ice pack to his temple. "Easy," she said softly. "You've got a concussion. But you're okay. You're going to be okay. Did you get the photos?" Ryan managed to ask. Victoria smiled and there were tears in her eyes. "Yes, every single one. And Ryan, it's even worse than I thought. James didn't just embezzle money. He paid to have my car sabotaged. It's all there in his handwriting. We have him." Ryan closed his eyes, relief flooding through him despite the pain. They'd done it. They had the evidence. But as he lay there, he realized that getting the evidence was just the beginning. Now they had to survive what came next. Ryan spent the next 48 hours in the medical suite, recovering from his concussion while Victoria worked with lawyers to build their case. The evidence from James's safe was damning. $12 million embezzled through shell companies, contracts awarded to businesses James secretly owned, and most shocking, a detailed record of the payment made to a mechanic named Derek Wilson, along with notes about ensuring the brake line modification was untraceable. Victoria wanted to move immediately, but her lawyers advised caution. James was powerful and connected. They needed to present the evidence carefully, to the right people at the right time. A misstep could give him a chance to destroy evidence or flee. But James forced their hand. On the morning of the second day, while Ryan was doing physical therapy exercises to combat the lingering dizziness from his concussion, Phillips came to the medical suite with news. James had called an emergency board meeting for that afternoon. The agenda was simple: vote to remove Victoria from her position as CEO due to mental incompetence. "He's making his move," Victoria said, her expression hardening. "He knows we found something and he's trying to secure his position before we can use it." "Then we use it now," Ryan said. "We take the evidence to the board meeting. It's risky. If we play this wrong, if the board doesn't believe us, we lose everything." Ryan stood up carefully, still a bit unsteady, but determined. "Victoria, you've spent 8 months trapped inside your own body. You survived someone trying to kill you. You fought your way back from a coma that should have been permanent. You're not going to lose now." Something shifted in Victoria's expression. For weeks, Ryan had watched her be strategic, calculating, always thinking 3 moves ahead. But now she just looked at him with raw emotion. "Why are you doing this? she asked quietly. Why risk everything for me? You barely know me. Ryan considered the question. He thought about that first night, changing her bandage, talking to her like she was a person when everyone else had given up. He thought about the journey since then, the threats and the danger, all the lines he'd crossed. Because it's the right thing to do, he said simply, and because somewhere along the way you stopped being just a patient. You became someone I care about, someone I believe in. The moment stretched between them, heavy with things unsaid. Then Victoria nodded, all business again. Then let's finish this. The board meeting was held at Ashford Industries headquarters in the same glass conference room where they'd met weeks before. But this time Victoria came prepared. Her lawyer, a sharp woman named Catherine Park, carried a briefcase full of documents. Ryan came too, despite his injury, because Victoria insisted she wanted him there. The board members were already seated when they arrived. 12 men and women who controlled the fate of a billion-dollar company. James sat at the head of the table, looking confident and composed in an expensive suit. His own lawyers flanked him. Victoria, James said smoothly as they entered, I'm glad you could make it. Though I'm concerned about your judgment in bringing Dr. Mitchell to a board meeting. This is company business, not a medical consultation. Dr. Mitchell is here as a witness, Victoria said, taking her seat. And before we proceed with your motion to remove me, the board needs to see some information. James's expression flickered. Just for a second, but Ryan caught it. Fear. The agenda is set, James said firmly. We're here to discuss your fitness to lead this company. You've been making wild accusations, acting erratically, showing clear signs of paranoia and delusion. Several board members have expressed concerns. Let me guess, Victoria said calmly. The same board members who've been receiving unusually generous consulting fees over the past 8 months? The ones who approved contracts with companies that don't seem to actually exist? The room went silent. Several board members shifted uncomfortably. That's exactly the kind of unfounded accusation I'm talking about, James said, but his voice had lost some of its confidence. This paranoia is clearly affecting your judgment. Then let's clear things up. Victoria nodded to Catherine, who began distributing folders to each board member. What you're looking at are financial records from the past 2 years. Shell companies created to funnel money out of Ashford Industries. Contracts awarded without proper bidding. And my personal favorite, page 12, which shows payments made to board members in exchange for their votes on the merger you've been pushing. The room erupted. Board members frantically flipped through their folders. Some faces went pale. Others looked angry, shocked, or confused. James stood up abruptly. These are fabrications, forgeries created by my sister to avoid accountability for her declining mental state. They're not forgeries, Victoria said, her voice cutting through the chaos. They're copies of records kept in your personal safe. Records written in your own handwriting. We also have USB drives with digital files showing every transaction, every fake company, every illegal payment. You broke into my office, James said, his mask of composure finally cracking. That's illegal. This evidence is inadmissible. In court, maybe, Victoria replied. But this isn't a court. This is a board meeting, and these board members deserve to know what you've been doing with their company. Catherine stood up. There's more. Victoria's accident 8 months ago wasn't an accident. Evidence shows that the brake line was deliberately damaged. And in James's records,